name is Larry Linder. I'm the coordinator of the Boston Literary District. This is our fourth presentation in the Literary Lunch Break series at South Station. I want to thank you so much either for waiting for a train or for coming here on purpose. Either way is good. Today's author, who's also a pediatrician and also a musician, is Lisa Wong. I want you to know that I met Lisa alone in the very well-appointed bedroom of Ted Cutler in his Back Bay Manse, eating incredibly decadent desserts off of silver trays. And I'm not going to say anything more about that till after 11 o'clock tonight. But she's a wonderful person, and we got to talking. And she is a pediatrician and a musician, and that combination is not a coincidence. Lisa firmly believes that the healing arts include not just medicine, but the arts in general, and the musical arts in particular. And she has lived her life around that premise. She was the president of the Longwood Symphony Orchestra for 20 years, which is comprised of musicians who are physicians and other healthcare professionals. And they feel it makes them better musicians. It makes them hear their patients better. It makes them able to interact with their patients in a way that serves as medicine. The other just terrific thing about Lisa is she really lives the life she believes. And that sounds easy, but it takes courage. We so often have faith that something is the right way, but we allow things to get in the way, and we sort of corrode a little from the inside as we don't follow our path, our vision for how things should be. But that's not so with Lisa. She really has always not veered from her dream of how life should be lived and how medicine should be approached and how music should be approached. It's a very holistic approach, and I would venture to say she probably lives it every moment of her life.
So first of all, I wanted to introduce my fellow musicians. This is Jerry Lee. He's a student at the Boston Conservatory. He's a violin major. And this is Leanne Song, who is graduating from Harvard in 6 days. She is going on then to go to Argentina to study music improvisation and music therapy. What are the qualities that you think about when you think of a good doctor? You want them to have knowledge. You want them to be at the top of their game as far as what the most relevant medical information is. You also want them to have technical expertise. You want them to be curious and always looking for another solution. You want them to be good listeners. You want them to be empathetic. You want them to be team players. You also want some confidence, playfulness, flexibility. And I would also say the quality of a really good doctor is somebody who can look through an entire diagnosis and know sort of what the path is going to be, but at every moment of your healthcare career, your healthcare experience, they're paying attention to every small detail, every lab, every symptom, still while having a perspective on the arc. So when you think about it, what is it that we value in a musician? Some of the things that are exactly the same: technical expertise, but curiosity, artistry, discipline, and also being able to hear an arc of an entire symphony while playing every single 16th note. So today we're going to be alternating music of Bach with some readings from my book, Scales to Scalpels. And in it, I think you'll hear some of the themes and variations that we're talking about. Themes and variations of different doctors who've come to the same journey of being musicians and healthcare providers as we are in our musical expression. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce first a doctor named Dr. Heidi Harbison Kimberly. And this is a scene of Dr. Kimberly as she's coming to a Longwood Symphony rehearsal. When talking about Longwood Symphony Orchestra, it all starts with our musicians. So let me introduce Dr. Heidi Harbison Kimberly, an emergency room doctor at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. She's tall, slender, muscular, with glasses magnifying her blue eyes, shoulder-length brown hair, usually pinned up casually on the back of her head. She sits near me in the violin section, where we meet every week. Let's look over her shoulder as she's ending her shift at the hospital on the way to an evening rehearsal. She finishes stabilizing a trauma patient who barely survived a car accident. When she sees the patient is safely on the way to the intensive care unit, Dr. Kimberly yanks her violin case from where she has stashed it under her desk. She slings the violin case over her shoulders like a pack and dashes out to the rack where her bright red mountain bike stands waiting. She snaps off the U-lock, jams on her helmet, slips on ankle reflectors, and switches on flashing safety lights, then leaps aboard and begins pedaling nimbly down the narrow street behind the hospital. Because of her position, hunched over the handlebars, the violin rides up behind her head, pressing her helmet and forcing her to crane her neck to see her way. Her ride is a 5-minute slalom through some of the top hospitals in Boston. It takes her backwards through her own career. Leaving the hospital where she works, she passes the hospital where she did her residency. Then she cuts through the quad of the Harvard Medical School where she did her training. Ringing the bell on her handlebars, she threads her way through the traffic and crowds on Longwood Avenue itself and skids to a stop in front of the venerable Boston Latin School, where our orchestra rehearses. She's been riding this same route to rehearsal for the past 11 years. It's like the midnight ride of Paul Revere, except it's the musicians are coming. The musicians are coming. Well, I'd mentioned that there is a lot of similarities between the work that a doctor does and a musician. And I just wanted to introduce you now to another doctor, Dr. Terry Buckmiller, who works at Children's Hospital in Boston. Doctor of Pediatric Surgery and violinist Terry Buckmiller knows how children develop. With chestnut hair that she keeps in a ponytail and intense eyes, she sparkles with energy, often snapping her fingers as she speaks. She's a marathoner and definitely has a runner's physique. Her soft voice belies the incredible strength within. She is one of the few females in the field of surgery. The American College of Surgeons has 18,000 members, and only 25% of them are women. Her field is even more rarefied. Terry specializes in fetal surgery, surgery on the unborn child with congenital anomalies to try to correct them before they're born. She approaches music as she does surgery with a methodical, cool determination, a laser focus, and unwavering quest for excellence. She has served as concertmaster of the orchestra on occasion, and in fact, in March 2011, we performed the Boston premiere of a work by David Keckley from Williams College, which contains some very tough violin solos for the concertmaster. Terry worked with the composer, sought out advice from the violin professionals, and was able to borrow a rare, beautiful old Italian instrument for the performance. She received rave reviews from the audience and the composer, who was in the audience that night. It was a pediatrician who introduced her to medicine when she was just 9 years old, about the same time when she began to play the violin. Buckmiller's favorite toy was Operation, in which you use a pair of tweezers to carefully remove body parts with funny names like wishbone, broken heart, spare rib, without setting off the buzzer. She was full of questions for her own doctor, who asked if she wanted to sit with him and see patients. Those were different days. I can't imagine having a 9-year-old following me around my practice these days, but he even let me watch an endoscopic procedure. I later saw surgery at the age of 11 at the University of California, San Francisco, in the operating theater. That was it. I loved it. It was absolutely fascinating. Her interest in medicine grew apace with her music. She worked as a candy striper when she was 15 and volunteered in the emergency room because that's where all the exciting stuff happens. When she went to college, she majored in music, but she always knew that she was going to be pre-med. Her guidance counselor and other adult advisors were concerned. It looked like she was being pulled in 2 different directions. But there was no conflict for Buckmiller. She believes that the 2 pastimes have overlapping skill sets.
What makes you a great musician, she asked. You have to break things down, repeat them, practice them over and over again, and then take a step back, put the emotional and mental pieces together to make it into the whole. It's the same with being a great surgeon. There are many little pieces, many tiny skills that you knit together in ever-changing ways. You practice them over and over until you get them perfect. Think about suturing. You're tying the same tiny knot over and over again, but every one of them has to be perfect because someone's life is on the line. You're saving a life one tiny knot at a time. I remember one of my teachers at the San Francisco Conservatory saying all we were going to do for the following week was the first 8 bars of the opening of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. The teacher said, all I want you to do for the 5 hours a day is to practice the opening 8 bars. So I played those 8 bars 1,000 different ways until I found the way I thought Mendelssohn wanted it to be played. That kind of repetition, experimentation, and exploration ingrained not only a skill, but a whole pattern of thought, a whole structure for approaching the world. Dr. Buckmiller continues, playing music teaches you to break a big task down into smaller tasks so you can master the skills of each. When you put those small pieces together, it creates the whole. It's the same if you're performing an operation. You have to master each separate tiny skill so that when you put it together, you've mastered the form and function of the entire procedure. And you have to have enough experience so that you can deal with the nuances when they arise. It's not that a great performer in music never makes a mistake. It's just that they adjust so quickly, the rest of the world doesn't notice. So it still sounds perfect. The same thing happens during an operation. Everything can't be perfectly under your control at all times, but you make an adjustment so seamlessly and so quickly that in the end, it turns out to be a perfect operation. There's a special dedication to being a great musician or a great doctor. You don't just happen on it. You lock yourself up in a practice room for hours and hours. You really focus, you do repetitive tasks, and then you back off from that and let the whole connection happen. That process is so intertwined with both professions that in a way, they're not different skills at all. Not all of the musicians in the orchestra are doctors. They can be other healthcare providers, and they teach us many different things. So I'd like to introduce you now to someone named Tamara Goldstein. She's an occupational therapist who specializes in working with senior citizens. She's a very, very thoughtful, wonderful violinist and a very, very heartfelt person who expresses herself with just wonderful phrases, which you'll see in a second once I find the page. There you go. This is the Ballad of Ruth. I'm often sent to dementia units, which can be spooky. You see people silently wandering. They don't make eye contact. They appear to be empty shells of their former selves. I once was asked to see a lady named Ruth, who had fallen and fractured her hip. She was in a unit located in an old historical building in Boston, an old-fashioned Victorian. The unit was located on the top floor with a low ceiling, reserved as the dementia unit. It felt like a deliberate separation or distancing from the rest of the population, both inside the building and from the community outside. You could practically see the cobwebs. The atmosphere is sobering and instantly provokes a sad and haunting feeling of the loss of oneself. After all, who are we without our memories and experiences? Ruth seemed to have completely lost her memories, and with them, herself. When I would go to see Ruth, she always seemed to be asleep in her chair. Her eyes were always closed. Physical therapy didn't want to go near her. They said, our one service was enough, she's gone. But it was my job to take her to the rehab department in her wheelchair every day and try to elicit some kind of response. The first day, I tried putting cold water on her face. Nothing. I tried warm water. Still nothing. I tried calling her, Ruth, Ruth, hello. And again, she just sat there. Following the requirements of the insurance company, I did that for an hour every day. She was alive, but completely unresponsive. It felt like an exercise in futility. So to make things a little more interesting for myself, I started to talk to her. I'd chatter away, but no response. But it was a way to pass the time, and it did her no harm. Finally, one day, I was being super animated, and she was just sitting there with her head slumped sideways and her eyes closed like always. And I said, let's turn on the radio and see what's on WCRB, Boston's classical station. The music came on, and I said, as it was playing, Ruth, I'd like to know more about you. Do you like classical music? I play the violin in the Longwood Symphony Orchestra. I think that's pretty impressive. And suddenly, she raised her head and opened her eyes. It was like a doll being wound up after sitting on a shelf. Everyone in the room got quiet. Ruth looked at me and said, my husband was a composer. It was the first time she'd spoken in months, if not years. Everyone asked me, what did you do? I said, I just turned on the radio. They ran into the office and Googled her name and found out that her husband was a composer. I went back and said, Ruth, what about you? Do you like music? As if nothing had happened during those silent months, she looked up and she said, I was an opera major at the New England Conservatory. Would you like to hear me sing? And in her clear soprano, she began singing, The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music. That song has so many beautiful, touching lyrics. It turned out that Ruth had a very nice voice indeed. She started walking. She would sing and smile as she walked. She told us that she had started a music camp, and it's still in operation. We looked it up and found that nothing she was telling us was false or fabricated. I couldn't believe it was the same woman. After that, she seemed remarkably able to accept her environment. Music didn't cure her, but the change in her demeanor was as though a switch had been turned on. She was interesting and participating in simple, everyday activities after that and interacting with us. It felt like a miracle. The music may have just been the right kind of connection she required, perhaps a combination of stimulating interest with something that was meaningful to her from her distant past. The familiar sounds of music emanating from the radio and the stimulation of her brain by soothing sounds may have awakened neural pathways and neurochemicals that aroused her to consciousness. There's no doubt for me that music facilitated her ability to heal. Reading is about a wonderful program in Venezuela called El Sistema. As I mentioned, I'm a pediatrician that takes care of children from when they're born all the way through the college. And there's a lot of things that can happen along the way. And I think music in the lives of every child is something that helps them with all kinds of things, self-regulation and discipline and all sorts of organizational skills. But when I was, I've been privileged to be able to go to Venezuela to see their El Sistema program a number of times. And this is a wonderful music program where 400,000 children, impoverished children from Venezuela, are allowed to be in high-level orchestras. And along the way, on one of my trips, I said, what happens to these kids if they're producing 400,000 musicians every year? How can they have that many orchestras? And they said, oh, no. They go to medical school. They go to dental school. They become citizens of their community. And that's what we want for music education. So one of them is Dr. Gonzalo Hidalgo, who I'd like to introduce you to now. In 2010, I met Dr. Gonzalo Hidalgo, 25-year-old principal bassoon of the El Sistema's most elite orchestra, the Simon Bolivar Youth Orchestra, conducted by Gustavo Dudamel. Dr. Hidalgo had recently graduated from medical school and was about to begin his surgical residency. When I asked him how he was able to attend the orchestra's daily evening rehearsals, he explained that almost all the doctors in his hospital had once been young musicians in El Sistema and secretly wished that they too were playing in orchestra. He recalls, there was a time when I was going on tour with the orchestra, so I asked the professor to give me my exams early. And he said, give me a reason why. When I told him I was performing in Berlin, he changed my schedule. El Sistema prepares people. It teaches constancy, personal relations, discipline, and being able to visualize your goals professionally and personally. A 12 or 13-year-old kid is taught discipline by being in an orchestra. A teenager of that age is not thinking, and certainly not thinking what he wants to be and about being a doctor. But the orchestra teaches discipline. It teaches you how to be in control of yourself. After playing the opening bassoon solo of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring to 5,000 people, it's not very scary for me to give a presentation or speak to a medical professor. Playing in orchestra gives you control of yourself and confidence, feeling secure in yourself. There was a patient in renal failure, but she did not want dialysis because she incorrectly thought that dialysis equaled death. She was very depressed. I was doing my psychiatric rotation and was asked to interview her to evaluate how deeply she was depressed. So I started to talk with her and began to talk about music. She was not a musician. She was very poor. She had not heard of El Sistema before, but she had heard of Gustavo Dudamel, who is now the conductor of the Los Angeles Philharmonic and a graduate of El Sistema. I couldn't reason with her that dialysis would help. She was a young woman with small children, and it didn't make sense for her to allow herself to die. I had to try to reach her in some other way. We started to talk about music at different sessions. I asked her if she had ever heard of classical music. She said she had never heard of classical music. That kind of music is boring. It's music for the rich people. I told her, no, not here in Venezuela. Here in Venezuela, music is not for the rich people. It is the music for everyone. It helps people like you. I suggested that her son could start an instrument and be part of the El Sistema. Then I gave her a CD of Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. I told her to listen to the slow movement of the Tchaikovsky. Close your eyes, think of your life and your kids. Think that you need to live in order to continue to help your children. If you don't live, you'll not be there for them. You won't see them grow up, and perhaps see them playing a concert themselves. The next day, I returned to the clinic, and her entire family was there. They thanked me and told me I was a special person because I had saved a life. They told me she had gone home and listened to the CD. She listened to the music and cried and cried. After she listened to the music, she decided she would take the dialysis so she could live for her children. I was very touched because it was not a conscious plan for me to give her the CD. I was not expecting this result, but I spoke from my heart because she was depressed and she was behaving as though she had a terminal illness when really there was something that she could do to save herself. A few years ago, we compiled a CD for the Longwood Symphony of excerpts from our concerts titled The Sounds of Healing, which was distributed to patients and colleagues. When we learned that Senator Ted Kennedy had been diagnosed with a brain tumor, we sent a CD to his office. Much later, a staff member close to the senator shared with us that the senator often listened to our music during his long trips between Cape Cod and Mass General Hospital. To the end, this great man was such a passionate champion of arts and healthcare in Massachusetts. And I can only hope and believe that our sounds of healing helped him a little bit during his courageous battle with cancer. So, when choosing a doctor, should you ask, where did you go to school? How long have you been practicing medicine? Absolutely. But you might want to add, what instrument do you play? Given the high percentage of physicians who are also musicians, you may discover a doctor who might just be a better listener, better collaborator, and better caregiver than you expected because of music. Thank you very much.
I wrote onomatopoeically across the cover page of the screenplay in big black letters. Then I capped his pen, put it back on his leather writing pad, and said, "That's how we scream in my country."